Wonderful. Welcome all. Thank you for coming out. I'm really excited to be on this very August, wonderful panel with my colleagues and to see so many of us here to talk about this subject. I did have a question for Dr. Tara. I'm going to put it in the chat and we can we can discuss it at the end. I was typing it when the intro started. So hopefully you can also see my slides. You have access to the tiny URL. So if you had a second device and you wanted to kind of follow along on your phone or whatever, you can do that, or you can follow along on screen. You can also keep the presentation. So this topic kind of evolved. I've been working on this for like a month now, 3 weeks maybe, once I was asked to do it. And it kind of got bigger than I thought it would. So I'm going to try to blow through this and stay within the 10-minute limit. And so there's time for questions. So I'm calling this agile assessment design. The whole idea being measuring process and product in a kind of post-Gen I, the post-Gen AI classroom, right? As Ms. Andrea said, Dr. Andrea said, I am a professor in the School of Education. I serve as chair of the Department of Teacher Education. Because of the world of AI, I have become very conscious about making sure that I explain who my thought partners are. So my thought partners for this particular presentation is Basiyr Rodney. She's also my wife and a doctoral student and an English teacher, and Miss Gulsina Baisova, and I'll talk about their contributions in different ways over time. But as I've been fighting with this topic, I've kind of talked to them back and forth. I've talked to my colleague Elvire, who is also online, and the members of the AI Exchange. Just some of that conversation kind of surfacing to the top has really helped me to think about how I might want to talk about this, right? So we'll talk about it in the context of how I see these shifts kind of happening and what I've been doing in class. So the agenda looks something like this. What is this AI thing that we're kind of operating under? I want to have a general platform that we talk about. We often say AI, but sometimes I want us to be clear that we're using the same definitions. How does Gen AI fit into assessment? And you've heard from my colleagues some aspects of how that actually happens. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about Bloom's taxonomy, which is one of the hallmarks and keys of assessment. And then I'll talk a little bit about my case and some student reporting that we learned from what we did. So these are kind of like quick overviews. I won't go through all of them. It's way too much, and you have the slides. But I want to talk a little bit about Gen AI adoption trends. I think it's important to this conversation. Then I want to talk about how that shapes assessment. And then we'll talk about Bloom's taxonomy. So we're in the middle of obviously a very big change. And I like to make this point because it comes up often that people are asking questions like, well, what do students think? And how does it fit into academic integrity and all of these things? And how does it fit into bias and privacy? All of these are important questions, and they're critical questions to discuss. But in a way, while we're discussing the questions, I think it's important for us to see kind of where we are, bird's eye view, right? And so in this graph, I've kind of put up the expenditure on the internet in its first 10 years as the internet was being built out. And that's the blue line at the bottom. And as you can see, internet expenditure just over its first 10 years really wasn't anything compared to where you see AI, which is the orange line at the top. In line 5 on this chart, if you will, is the dot-com blip, if you will, that wipes out some of the market for the internet. And the line above, as you can see, AI's expenditure is heading upwards into $10 trillion in what is the next 4 or 5 years, right? So it's absolutely astounding what companies are doing and what they're spending money on. And if the internet has impacted our lives in the way it has, then AI clearly has already obliterated so much of our own life experience, right? It's shifted so much in our world. Software adoption tools, the way in which we have kind of all come to the internet and come to internet tools, you can kind of see how long it took some of the devices and apps we've used to impact our world and our lives. And we're using the number 700 million because it kind of speaks to what is roughly about 10% of internet users. And so if you look at the iPhone and iOS devices, a lot of us are iPhone users, that took 6 years to get to 700 million. And ChatGPT has taken 3 years. So it's already kind of completely shifted how we do things and how we're moving, right? Students are already active users. So I think it's important to understand that that's happening. Teachers and admins are already active users, right? And so with that kind of activity, I think it has been important to think about how we roll it out in our school and class experience. Now, what do we mean by generative AI? It's basically a computing platform that mimics human intelligence. What does that mean for real? It means that as of last week, we could deepfake videos relatively easily. That any representation of any one of us on the screen could easily be by a prompt, be kind of superimposed onto some other scene, right? And that's happening right now. Scary, yes, absolutely. But I think it speaks to how far we've kind of pushed, right? And how far the technology has driven us. So our students, and again, my colleagues have pointed this out, are capable of creating all kinds of novel outputs with AI. Almost anything you ask them to create in text, anything you ask them to create in writing or voice, they can start to develop that by a prompt. So as that consciousness has kind of hit me, I've put together a program here in our school, an AI certificate, and it became very clear to me that our students were going to be immersed in this, and it had to change how we would teach. So that has been my struggle over the last maybe 3 semesters. There's a book called Bowen and Watson. I recommend that we get it and read it. It's not a hard read. By Bowen and Watson. It's basically teaching and learning with AI, and they make the point that we should think of AI performance as the new C work. That students with an AI tool can create artifacts and objects that are basically at a C level. So that means we want to push above that level, right? We want to get students to interact more deeply and drive them above what is the AIC that they're all going to easily be able to prompt out of the machine. In our world, in terms of instructional design, we have been always kind of had in the back of our mind in the last couple of years the use of Bloom's taxonomy to help us to figure out what that base performance is, right? What are levels of recall? What do we mean when we say that we're talking about higher order learning, higher order thinking? Those elements being the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. The taxonomy has shifted from just kind of concepts to actual verbs, which help us to understand what we expect students to be able to do, not just this idea that, what's an evaluation? Evaluation is an aspect of kind of creativity. So the 2001 version of Bloom's taxonomy has kind of shifted towards action. And so as I'm thinking about my courses and my course design, I'm always thinking about what action can students perform in order to demonstrate their performance, right? And Bloom's taxonomy kind of helps us to give these tools. So in recent time, you could go buy this wheel on like Amazon, or you go find it on the internet. It's the Bloom's taxonomy words. And what we would normally do is when we're making learning objectives, we say, oh, let's go into the words over here and place them inside of our learning objectives. Students will be able to. And, for the purposes of describing, we would find a word that easily says describe. So here's the interesting part of it. Our AI tools know all these words. And so they can easily spit out any one of these definitions in the ways we want them. So we don't need to go look for this wheel anymore. You can buy them on Amazon from anywhere from $5 to $20 if you can't remember the words and you just want a diorama in the office, right? But your AI tools already kind of capture all of these already. But what that means is we can increase the frequency of our assessments because of AI tools. We can increase the agility of our assessments. We can make our assessments more tightly student-centered or content-centered because of how these tools kind of build out. And so one of the things I thought about doing this semester is, what if I looked at all of our programs and courses and rethought how we built assessment across the course? So the Online Learning Center has a culture of saying, well, an 8-week online course should have maybe 2 to 4 discussions every week, and then maybe a paper or a project. So I said, well, in the age of generative AI, how do I stop my students from simply just generating all those papers and just handing them back to me, right? That, I don't know, get fed back into AI to be scored or something. So to Dr. Tara's point, you're wondering, well, can the students do the thing, or will they just feed it to AI, and then even if they know what to do, then you're simply just judging the AI. And so what I thought about was a new framework for organizing our courses. And so we have multiple programs in the Department of Teacher Education, undergrad programs and graduate programs. And so we thought, well, if AI is everywhere and students can't resist the temptation, and temptation is so difficult, how do we redesign? And so the redesign came down to something like this. Let us kind of go back to the old, give them a traditional kind of multiple choice assessment, but that was not embedded in the textbooks. Because now you could use your lectures, your course notes, you could use all kinds of different, even this conversation, and generate out of it the questions for the exam, hand them a study guide, and use that as a way to see their learning, right? To measure their learning. And so that was the framework in which I thought about it. And then reduce all the small assignments we would normally give. So rather than, I don't know, 12 discussions in a whole course, why not give them 4 discussions, 1 project, and a midterm? And use that as a way to kind of gauge their performance. And so that really is how we ended up here, really taking down the small assignments in the course, reducing volume, and really targeting depth. And returning to one of our old keys, the use of a multiple choice exam. So the pace kind of shifted, and I would argue this as my first rule, that more than 5 to 7 assessments in 8 weeks, or 12 to 16 in terms of just discussions, let's bring those down. And in our MAT conversation, myself and Dr. Tara and Dr. Renee decided, well, why don't we just make an 8-week course have 5 assessments and use that as measurement? So in some ways it's tricky because I hear people groaning like, well, is that enough? And that was really what we were driving at. Could you make some things deep and some things shallow enough rather than just lots of activities? So this presentation goes through the work that we did that I've done to kind of do this across different courses. We created multiple choice exams that were mapped to Bloom's taxonomy: 30% recall, 30% application, 30% synthesis, generated from the sources that lectures that I give and the readings that we have to go in and check and make sure these examinations are actually valid, they have some fidelity, and then uploaded them into Canvas, right? And all of that was created through the use of generative AI tools, right? And then also a companion was to give the students a study guide. So the students would get a study guide a week before, and then they would get their exams. So that's what we've done. So first rule was pacing. Second rule was adjusting the design. And then the third rule was to kind of get that feedback, kind of like what Dr. Tara was talking about. How do students feel about this new kind of reshaped design for their assessment, right? Because you took away that kind of weekly touch point of the discussion. There's some weeks when there might be no discussion, but they're still reading papers, they're still going through, and they know that there's an exam coming up in a couple of classes. And so based on that, we did a quick survey of them, and the survey told us the following. The majority of the students so far said, we actually think the multiple choice thing worked really well for us, which shocked me, by the way, because I thought everybody's like, nobody wants to do multiple choice anymore. We've kind of given up on all that. But there are about 20 students who filled out the survey in the time we asked, which is about 40% of the set of all the students who went through this experience. And they came back and said, we actually like that. It worked for us. And then they were asked, well, how did you use the study guide? And they said, well, we did use the study guide as a way to study, to check our knowledge, and to check our assignments. And so we found that to be a useful path for them as well. So again, informal, but it allows us to see that the change actually has some kind of satisfaction for students. The tools that we kind of used in the development process, I wanted to put on a slide so you guys could see them, are the following tools. So I think of generative AI tools as a kind of toolkit, right? Me and my little ones were talking a few weeks ago, and I said, if we were to think about generative AI tools as a cabinet maker, and a cabinet maker came to your house and said, I'm going to upgrade your cabinets, but I only learned to use a hammer, so I only use a hammer for everything. And somebody else comes and said, I have this fancy toolbox with lots of things in it. Who would you pick to want to upgrade the cabinets? And I mean, they're like 10 and 9, but they're like, of course we want the guy with all the tools. So I like to share with us that although there are lots of tools, we shouldn't get so wedded to one tool that we feel like it's the only way to do. All these tools have their level of use and validity for what we're trying to do. So this is just a list of tools. If you're interested in learning more about this kind of approach that is, Bloom's taxonomy and AI, there's a rich set of documentation and articles coming out now where people are talking about, well, how do we create assessments using Gen AI? and Bloom's taxonomy in the context of the classroom. So I'll leave it there, but that's kind of the overall structure of what we were doing this semester. I think it works really well because it takes us outside of exams built in the textbook, and it really lowers the temperature on courses so students can go deep. This was the multiple choice aspect. There's another aspect with the projects that we actually did, but I wanted to focus on this for us because I know some people still do traditional assessments, and I think it really works for that because students feel empowered and feel supported. Thank you.